let you partner with it. I ain't trying to stop you from the love that guides you. I just want to be the
Hello and welcome everyone to Free the Gaze, a best practice discussion on cinematic emancipation. My name is Maxa Zoller and I'm the artistic director of the International Women's Film Festival Dortmund+Köln. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all here this evening. This panel discussion has been a long process. It's the result of many different turns and bends that me and my team took in order to arrive to its final title, Free the Gaze, and its final panelists. These are Anya Freer, who joins us from Kingston, Jamaica, and will be speaking with us because Pratibha Parma is unable to join us. She had to cancel this discussion last minute because she's on a plane right now. But I'm sure that we will have an amazing time with Anya, who I had the pleasure to meet shortly before this discussion. We are also here in discussion with Emma Davey, who joins us from Scotland, Nehemi Lemal, who is in Lyon right now, and Paulina Lawrence, who divides her time between Berlin and Porto. Amma Johnston will moderate this discussion. Dear panelists, welcome and thank you so much for your input. This panel has been primarily conceived and put into place by my festival colleagues, Stephanie Gertz and Betty Schiel, who have not shied away from extra hours of work, intellectual energy, network expertise, and heartfelt commitment to this project. And a big applause for them. Thank you so much, Steffi and Betty. The title, Free the Gaze, is to be taken with a pinch of salt, because how can the gaze be freed within the conditions of neoliberal late capitalism? It cannot. And should we not use the term gaze more critically, since it's tied to a very specific time period in film and art history? Yet we felt that rather to do without these terms altogether, we'd rather bend them and turn them and see if we can take them into a different direction. So we decided to keep this title, also because Betty wanted to keep it, you know, punchy and insert a pinch of humor as she does. The discussion that we're leading tonight will also feed into the festival program. The International Women's Film Festival Dortmund+Köln will go online from the 15th to the 20th of June. It will be online for the first time in its history due to the pandemic. It will be available from everywhere in Germany. I mean, the films will be available everywhere in Germany, and our different discussions which always center around many different aspects of this evening will be available on social media all over the world. So please come and visit us between the 15th and the 20th of June. I would like to say a few technical things before we start. If for some reason you have a technical problem, you can try to leave this room and come back in, because most of the time this solves the problem. If not, we have an email in the Q&A and the chat function that will lead you to Kilian, our technical support, and he will be able to solve that problem. Kilian, you could maybe put your email into the chat and the Q&A function now. The chat function we would like to leave for questions to the panelists, and the team will cluster these questions at the end. The Q&A, or in Germany it's the F&A, Fragen und Antwort function, we would like to keep for technical problems. So I cannot hear you, or I can't see the image or anything like that. Please put that into the Q&A function. All right, we have an interpreter. Nehemi will speak in French. So for those of you who don't speak French, you can see a little tiny globe on the lower section of your screen. If you click on that and you choose the English channel, you will hear the translation in English from our dear interpreter. Yeah. Also, what's useful is the auto-translate function. That's right next to it. It's called live transcript on my screen. And if you click that, you will see the English transcript of everything that's been said. So for those of you who don't speak or understand English, and we speak quickly sometimes, you can use this. I hope I have mentioned everything. You will see me after the discussion again, because then I will lead you into the bar. We are hoping to see you for a virtual drink in our digital bar called Wonderme after this discussion, where we have 5 different thematic clusters, each of which are presented by one of our supporters. But I will tell you about that after the discussion. Before I introduce Arma, I would like to thank WIFT, ProQuote, and the International Film School in Cologne, who all have helped us to come up with this panel and support us and have put it out in the world for us. So thank you very much, dear partners, for this cooperation. Thank you especially for the Film- and Medienstiftung NRW, because they have funded this project. They've been supporting our panel, our yearly panel, since 2012. And I have to say that without them, we wouldn't be here. They were very generous and flexible in moving this panel away from its original place and context, which is the Berlinale, which didn't really take place this year, as you know. And we are hosting the event now in April. And they really have been going with us all the way. And that's not really something that I would expect. So thank you very much. And I would like to give Katharina Blum the microphone for a few words to say. So Katharina, thank you.
Okay, there's the video also. Yeah, thank you, Maxa, and a very good evening to all of you. I hope there are a lot of listeners out there to follow the discussion this evening, and I think it's a discussion why we're here for, so I will be brief. As the Regional Film Fund here in NRW, we are very happy that the International Women's Film Festival is organizing this event today. We have been supporters and participants for several years, and we really appreciate the work of the colleagues. So many thanks to Maxa Zoller, Christina Essensberger, Stefanie Gertz, and the whole team really for making this panel possible. Thank you very much. En plus, the topic is more than important. I think diversity issues are becoming more and more common. Also, diverse stories are far from being self-evident, but the discussion about participation and diversity has been going on for a few years, and the discussion helps pushing things ahead. For example, as Film- and Medienstiftung NRW, we have supported studies by the Malisa Foundation and on the representation of women in film and television, or studies on gender representation and diversity in streaming and SVOD offerings. But also during our daily work, we can watch how things are changing, even if they change slowly. For example, concerning the film funding, we observe that more projects with a female director are submitted for funding today than a few years ago. So these are just small examples from my world. I think the panelists, so thank you also from our side very much to be here. So the panelists can tell you much more about participation and real change in film business. So I'm looking very much forward to the discussion, and thank you all for joining us, and have a good evening. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you again, Katharina, for all your support. And now I would like to introduce Arma. Alma Josephine Johnston. I don't think we could have found a more brilliant moderator for this discussion. Alma was very vital in finessing the conceptual framework of this evening's talk. And she was also very generous in activating her network for finding suitable panelists. We are grateful for her critical input and also her sharp comments, especially around the term of diversity. Maybe we'll touch on this later. Yes, and I'm also, can say a big thank you for your flexibility and your generosity, Alma. And I really hope this won't be the last event we will organize together. I hope we'll stay in touch because it was really eye-opening and also a lot of fun to meet you. Alma describes herself as a researcher, an artist, and a pleasure activist. Her work is concerned with climate colonialism, and at the moment she's a PhD candidate at Birkbeck College in the psychosocial department. But she joins us from her teaching fellowship at the Center for Curatorial Studies and Human Rights at Bard College in New York. I think it would take a whole panel to describe her different interests and her research. So I think I better give the mic over to Alma so she can talk about herself and we hear it all from her. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to this talk.
Thank you so much, Maxa, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you to everybody, all the 142 people who we cannot see but feel here with us. Thank you especially to Stephanie and Betty for the many, many, many emails back and forth, and date changes and followings up and link sharings and checking-ins, and to Killian for the fantastic tech support. I know that organizing events throughout COVID is in many ways a series of heartbreaks as things are shifted and moved and cancelled and have to be reformulated. And I think in my work, particularly looking at how we transform and respond and adapt to climate transformation and climate change, this really is a lesson. This pandemic really is a lesson in how we respond and how we continue to adapt and remain attentive and in allyship with one another and our global community. And we have a real global community here of panelists today. So I want to start by kind of expanding a little bit on the topic of this conversation. So we have this title, Free the Gaze, a best practice discussion on cinematic emancipation, which is a very loaded title. And we did go back and forth quite a bit on the various words that we're using and the conversations that we are bringing into the room and the histories that we're bringing into the room with this language. And I think it's important to say that I don't feel any of the language is adequate. So we talked quite a lot about diversity and inclusion and how multiculturalism. I was raised predominantly in the UK, and I come from a very particular language around diversity and inclusion, and there are different versions of that in France and in Germany and in the Netherlands and in Nordic countries and in the States and in various parts of the global South. And all of this language is loaded. So I'm hoping in this panel, in this conversation, we can start to get into some of those intricate, messy, uncomfortable conversations of why things don't work. And I wanted to think a little bit about this return to the word gaze. So without getting too theoretical about it, I think it's important to note that this term does come from a psychoanalytic background. It's a Lacanian term, a psychoanalytic term, which means that it comes from a history of studying people's minds, certain people's minds. So Lacan defined the gaze as an anxious state of mind that comes with the self-awareness that one can be seen and looked at. The psychological effect upon the person subjected to the gaze is a loss of autonomy upon becoming aware that they are a visible object. And all of the films and various projects that we'll see clips from today that these amazing panelists are producing, I think, are really grappling with this moment of being seen and how the gaze can be violent, how it can be objectifying, how it can be dehumanizing, historically as well as in the present. So what does it mean to return to this word, the gaze, that many people may know from like a second wave feminist kind of reclamation of this term? What does it mean to still be thinking about how we can decolonize and depatriarchize the camera, this medium that comes from very violent colonial histories that is and was used to study people, to categorize and classify people? And what does it mean to now be in a moment when there are many people who were dehumanized and continue to be behind the camera and having different levels of agency? Does that change the dehumanization that's happening? Does that provide more agency? Does that mean that communities are more empowered? These are kind of some of the sticky kind of issues and histories that I wanted to just bring into the room. And finally, I want to finish with the visual, social, Black feminist theorist and thinker and writer Bell Hooks's oppositional gaze, which she coined in 1992, because I think something else that these works are trying to do is speak back to that objectifying gaze, to say we are not mere objects, we are not mere subjects in your fantasies and stereotypes. And so she said, Bell Hooks said, there is power in looking. By courageously looking, we defiantly declared, not only will I stare, I want my look to change reality. Even in the worst circumstances of domination, the ability to manipulate one's gaze in the face of structures of domination that would contain it opens up the possibility of agency. And so for the next hour and a little bit, I would like for us to think about opening up the possibility of agency. So that being said, please do write any questions in the Q&A section throughout the discussion, and we'll collate them. So when they come to you, please do write them down so that in the Q&A button, so that when we come to the Q&A section, we already have a good amount of questions to draw on. And we're going to begin with some provocations and sharings of work by the wonderful panelists, starting with Paulina, who's currently in Porto. Paulina Lorenz is a producer and a script writer, and I've just really felt very honored to kind of deep dive into some of your work over the past weeks, and I'm really excited that you're here with us, and we'll be starting us off with your provocation. So Paulina, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just thinking already right now about all the interesting things you've already said. Yeah, so I'm a screenwriter and producer, and I'm part of a film collective. We are called Jünglinge, and my fellow filmmakers in the collective are Faraz Shariat and Raquel Dukba. And we kind of label our collective that's based in Berlin as a queer and a post-migrant one. And those are also the labels that our debut feature film, Futur 3, or No Hard Feelings in English, that came out last year in cinemas in Germany and is now available to stream since last week, that the film is also framed with. And Futur 3, I'm going to talk a little bit about the film and then show you a clip to kind of understand maybe more our practice, what we are trying to do and what we're trying to challenge. Futur 3 is a coming of age story. It's a queer love story a story that has at its core the meeting of three young people in a German small town, and the encounter of three different generations of immigration to Germany. And the film kind of speaks from a status quo of Germany as a post-migrant society, meaning a society where, although there's been several generations of descendants of immigrants who have grown up in Germany and feel matter-of-factly belonging in German society, they're still being framed as other, as non-belonging, and also migration, both in collective history as well as on German TV and cinema screens. Migration is still framed and visualized mostly as a problem or as an exception to a norm. So the film was kind of developed from this frustration from a second or post-migrant generation in Germany, this still being framed as other, even though one clearly belongs, and also the art of Black, Indigenous, people of color artists in Germany still always being classified as migrant art. Yeah, so that's kind of where the vision for Futur 3 came from. And with Futur 3, we're trying to create a visual and a narrative challenge to this kind of German history telling and German film culture that largely omits these narratives around flight and migration. And that often characterizes and frames BIPOCs in stereotypical harmful ways and uses harmful narrative tropes. And we're trying to challenge this visual and discursive framing. And also the film is kind of a political challenge to the injustices and violences that are the European deportation regime. So before we show the clip, I just want to say, point out two aesthetic strategies that we try to draw on for this challenge. And the first strategy is what my colleague Faraz has called popcorn activism, or activist popcorn cinema, which kind of plays on the fact that we love pop culture. And we often draw on the world of pop culture, music, and fashion as these kind of places of longing, belonging, of utopia, but also as places and spaces for politics. And that we try to create stories that are accessible and entertaining and still have like an activist backbone. So still really stemming from this anti-racist, queer feminist, and decolonial practice, or these struggles to practice in this kind of way. And then the second strategy is working with and building archives that both remember and challenge histories. So in the clip that you're going to see, and also in the feature of Futur 3, we're engaging with the intimacy of family archives and treating biographical knowledge as sites of history telling that are largely marginalized in national history telling, and kind of asking how can migrant home videos actually make claims of belonging and challenge normative German history writing that oftentimes leaves out these kind of stories of migration, flight, and homemaking. Yeah, so in the clip, you're going to see some of that popcorn activism, as it's a sequence where kind of a music video style sequence turns home video, and a montage where we draw on both pop imagery and aesthetics and engage with kind of the flashy and the stylized, as well as engaging with the quiet and the everyday of a home video footage, and how maybe both these different strategies can be ways to return the gaze on marginalized bodies and histories.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paulina, for that wonderful clip. And yeah, this introduction to popcorn activism. I'm really excited to speak more about it. Okay, Anya, I'd love to pass over to you in Kingston, a bit closer to my time zone, and to introduce your beautiful provocation as a documentary filmmaker, curator, and founder of Goat Curry Gallery.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you guys so much for having me. So my name is Anya Freya. I'm an Australian Jamaican filmmaker and artist and a curator. I came to Jamaica 5 years ago with this deep longing to connect with my Black ancestry. And I was only going to be here for a couple of months, but after 2 months, I just realized that I needed to stay and that this needed to be a much kind of bigger journey for me in discovering. So I didn't take my return ticket. I stayed in Jamaica, applied for my citizenship. And ever since, I've been moving around in a very intentional way, collecting very intimate, everyday stories and experiences. And these are really conversations and interactions that I'm having with people that are really kind of informing my understanding of my history and my ancestry. And as I'm moving around Jamaica, I'm becoming more and more aware of how divided the country is. A lot of people talk about mental slavery in Jamaica and this structure which really upholds the colonial structures of keeping people very separated. And so you have these country communities, you have this town communities, you have uptown, you have downtown. So along class and also color and location, Jamaica is very divided. So for me, as I'm sort of moving through these different spaces, I'm really concerned about finding ways to interrogate these different spaces and represent underrepresented voices and represent everyday stories in the work that I'm doing. And so it's kind of subjects of love and connection to country and vulnerability. And these are coming out in conversations, and this is what really inspires my work. It's these very intimate, short little portraits that I'm creating. And these are what I use to sort of, push against these different spaces, which I feel like is really keeping Jamaica quite segregated. And also being an outsider coming in and wanting to connect and wanting to sort of explore more, I think is a unique experience, because I don't feel like this is something that happens much in Jamaica in terms of moving around in this way. So in addition to being, to directly talking to a Jamaican audience, I'm also really interested in sort of reaching the further diaspora and kind of like inviting people to come back through these stories that might inspire like a longing and a nostalgia. And I feel very passionate about inviting people back, encouraging people to come back and encouraging people to sort of, pour love and creativity and energy back into Jamaica. Because you have sort of a lot of violence and a lot of crime. And this is also keeping these pockets very separated. I think a big misconception in this country is that people want to just leave. And for me, I've really enjoyed hearing so many stories about connection to country and connection to culture. And really it's people having to leave, but not wanting to leave. So I'm also, with the stories that I'm collecting and that I'm curating, I'm also looking at the spaces which, where I can display those to sort of intersect these different spaces which are happening. And so I was exploring the folklore story of River Mama, which is Jamaica's freshwater mermaid, and traveling to different remote river communities and collecting these oral histories. I was displaying these as a video installation at the National Gallery of Jamaica. And I was really, really happy when I heard about these children coming through and engaging with this piece of work in a very sort of excited and enthusiastic way. Because essentially these children are in Kingston, and you have these stories from the hills, from rural communities, which because of this divide aren't circulating, aren't moving, aren't aren't getting to everyone in the country. These children hadn't heard about these stories. So I also put on an exhibition of some craft artists and presented their work in a fine art gallery in Kingston alongside little video portraits and studio visits. And this was an opportunity again to invite an audience in and have them interact with the works, listen to the stories, and sort of look at these works and the stories in a new way. So I want to share a story. It's called Auntie Dawn Home. And this is a film which I made very early on in my journey in Jamaica. But I really feel like it speaks to that celebration of connection to community and country. So yeah, Killian, can we cue the video? Thank you.
I didn't have anywhere to live. So my father gave me this little spot. I didn't even know how I would drop the first brick. It started from a tourist that comes here, and they gave me a little money to go buy clothes. So I decided to take it to buy some brick, and that's where I start. Well, this house means the world to me. No money would get this house from me. I work hard on it, draw the water from the well. The happiest memory I have is when I finished the house and I looked up, even if I'm sleeping on the floor, and I look up and I said, oh my God, this is really me. And I would sleep like a baby. It have happy memory, it have sad memory, it have so much, but it is mine.
Thank you so much, Anya, for that. Thank you. And for sharing Auntie Dawn with us. I've watched that in the slightly extended clip, I think 4 or 5 times, along with your other portraits. I love that you categorize them as portraits. And I encourage everyone, all the participants, to go to Curry Goat Gallery's website.
Goat Curry.
Where you, sorry, Goat Curry, my bad. I apologize. Goat Curry Gallery's website. See, I'm just so used to going to the shop and asking for curry goat, so it's in my head. Goat Curry Gallery's website, and checking out some of the other portraits, because they're really they're available, which is amazing, that they're available free online. Okay, beautiful. So let's move to Naomi Lemau, who is joining us from Lyon in France. Naomi is a director of photography, and your recent film. And now my French is terrible, so I'm going to totally mess up the title. I apologize. On ne peut plus rien dire.
On ne peut plus rien dire.
Okay, there we go. Exactly.
On ne peut plus rien dire.
Cannot say anything. Has just come out, I think, to really quite an explosive reception. So I'm really excited to have you here, and I hand over to you for your provocation.
Oui, merci beaucoup de m'avoir introduit.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
Donc, du coup, je m'appelle Némi Lemay.
So I'm
j'ai
Némi
23 ans, j'ai eu
Lemay,
la
I'm
chance de
23,
faire un
and I was
film qui
lucky
s'appelle
enough to
On
make
ne
a
peut plus
film,
rien dire,
On ne peut plus rien
avec
dire,
19
you can't
ans.
say anything anymore, when I was 19.
J'avais porté
At the
la coupe
time,
afro,
I had
en
an
fait,
afro
quand j'avais
hairstyle
19 ans, et j'ai
when
reçu
I was
beaucoup de
19.
critiques, beaucoup d'insultes
And I
dans
was
la rue, de la
criticized,
part de la
insulted a
police,
lot on the
etc., autre
street
chose.
by the
Et
police
le
and
plus
others.
violent dans cette histoire, c'était
And what
que je n'ai
violated
pas
me
entendu
most in all
de ma
this was
famille ou de
that
mes
my
amis, parce qu'on
family
me
and my
disait
friends
que
didn't
ça
understand me
n'existait pas
because
en
they
France,
said this
le
didn't happen in
racisme.
France,
Parce
racism.
qu'en fait, en France, c'est assez
It's
compliqué
true
de
that in
parler de
France it's
racisme.
a little
Il y a
bit
beaucoup
complicated to
cette
talk
idée
about
de tabou.
racism. There's a
Heureusement, il y a eu des
widespread
films comme le
denial.
film d'Amandine Gay, Ouvrir la voie.
Fortunately, there have
Mais
been
dans ce
films
film, je me
like
retrouve
Amandine
pas
Gay,
encore
Ouvrir la voie,
pleinement
but I
dans ce
didn't
que je
completely
vis, parce
identify
qu'il y avait
with
vraiment
this.
ce
It
déni de
wasn't
la
about
part
my
de
life,
tout
because
le
we
monde.
really have this
En
denial
France, on
all
est un peu
around us.
dans une
In
société
France,
où
we're
on a un certain
in a
héritage,
society
oui, de
where we have
liberté,
a certain
mais
heritage of
j'ai
freedom,
l'impression que tout ça
but I get the
est
impression
loin
that all of this is a
derrière nous.
long way
Et
removed. It's all in the
aujourd'hui, c'est
past.
plus du tout
And these
le cas.
days, it's not
C'est-à-dire
at all
que
like that anymore.
on vit quand même
So
surtout en temps de
we're
Covid,
living,
on a quand même des
especially
lois qui
in
sont
times
quand
of
même
COVID,
oppressives
we have a lot of
encore aujourd'hui
oppressive
en France
laws.
par rapport aux femmes voilées,
We
par
still do
rapport
in France
à
about
plein
veiled
de choses, par
women
rapport au racisme. Il y
and
a
about
le
lots
temps
of things,
aujourd'hui pour
racism.
les minorités est compliqué.
So it's a
Et donc, du coup,
complicated
quand j'ai
time
fait
for
On ne peut plus rien
minorities at
dire,
the
j'étais vraiment dans
moment.
cette
And
ère
when I was making this
de
film,
vouloir
it was
dire
a
à
period
tous.
for me where I
Au
wanted to
début, je
say
voulais
everything at all
interviewer
costs.
beaucoup des femmes noires pour
At
qu'elles
first, I
témoignent.
wanted to interview a lot of black women for
Excusez-moi.
them to testify. Oh, sorry
Au
about the
début, je voulais
glitch.
interviewer des femmes noires
I
pour
wanted
qu'elles
to interview a
témoignent,
lot of black women to
mais
testify.
je me suis dit finalement, je vais aller interviewer ma
But in the
famille
end, I said, no, I'm going to interview my
parce que
family
dans ma famille, ils ont tous des
because
points
in
de
my
vue différents. J'ai ma
family,
sœur
they all have
qui
different views. I've got
vit
my
du
sister
racisme
who has
dans
experienced
l'armée,
racism
qui
in
travaille
the
dans l'armée
army.
et qui va
She
dire
works for the
non,
army,
j'ai jamais
and
vécu
who
de
says,
racisme dans ma
no,
vie.
I never
Je dis,
had
ah
any
si, une
racism
fois,
in my life. Oh yes, there was
ah
this
si,
one
ah si,
occasion.
une fois j'ai vécu du racisme.
Oh
En
yes,
fait,
there
toute ma
was that
famille
occasion, there was
raciste.
racism.
Tous mes frères et
So
sœurs,
all my
sauf ma mère.
family, all my brothers and my sister, not my
Et quand
mother,
je suis
have
allée
experienced
filmer,
racism.
je n'aurais pas dit
So
que
when I
c'était
wanted to film
sur
them,
ce
I didn't
sujet.
tell
Du
them
coup,
that
ça
it was going
donne
to be about this
des moments
subject.
particuliers
So we have some very
de vie.
specific
Et pour la
moments in our
première fois,
lives,
je pense,
and for the first
un
time, I
film,
think,
on voit des personnes qui n'ont pas l'habitude
in
de
the
prendre la
film,
parole
we see
sur ce
people
sujet
who aren't
et
used
qui
to
n'ont pas
talking about
l'habitude,
this
qui
issue
veulent pas forcément
and who
témoigner,
aren't used
témoigner sur ce
to
sujet
testifying,
sans
certainly
forcément se
testifying
rendre
about
compte.
this
Et c'est ça que je
issue,
voulais montrer, le déni du
and they
racisme
didn't
en
know what I
France.
was doing. That's what I wanted
Et
to show, the denial of
dans
racism in
ce film, on voit
France.
tout ce
And
cheminement,
suddenly, in this
etc.
film, you see the
Et
whole
ensuite,
process,
moi, je suis chef
and
opératrice de
then
base, et grâce à ce
I
film,
am
j'ai pu
basically a
du coup,
DOP,
réaliser.
but
Mais
thanks to
après,
this film, I was able to
filme,
direct as well.
je-
But I do
j'accompagne
work
des réalisateurs,
a lot
j'essaye d'accompagner
for
des réalisateurs qui
directors,
sont issus des
and
minorités,
I've
qui
worked
ont des choses à
with
dire, qui n'ont pas
directors who come
forcément
from
tout le
minorities
temps
who've got stuff
la
to
parole.
say, but
Je
don't
fais
necessarily
partie
get the
du collectif
floor.
Femmes à la caméra,
I'm part of a collective called
qui est
Femmes à la Caméra, Women
collectif
on
extrêmement
Camera.
important.
It's an
Et
extremely
ensuite, là, je
important
suis en train de
collective.
réaliser un autre
And there
deuxième
I'm currently
documentaire sur
making
la
a
sororité
second
et
documentary
comment on
about
s'en sort
sisterhood
après un deuil.
in mourning.
Et c'est dans la campagne vers Marseille,
It's set in the
là où j'habite
countryside
encore.
area near
Et
Marseille where I'm still
donc, du coup,
living.
je pense
So I
que,
think that
que l'extrait va être intéressant, enfin que vous
you'll
allez
find the
trouver
clip
intéressant, enfin, j'espère.
interesting.
Et
I
voilà.
hope so anyway.
J'espère avoir
There
assez
you
parlé.
go. I hope I've spoken enough.
Maillot avec un trou ou pas?
Faut maman. Hein. Maman, tu vas dans le cadre? Oui. Bah viens. Bah quand tu prends la photo, je suis gelée là. Ok. Il manque Thomas. Thomas. Non. Voilà. Thomas. Je suis nature moi. Il est superficiel comme vous, vous maquillez, vous. Il est à la douche. Je me suis pas maquillée. Alors, ça tourne. Ouais, je sais pas, soyez plus proche, non? Attendez. Alors, regardez la caméra. Oui, c'est bon, on voit ton logo de l'OM. Tu diras quand c'est collé, hein. Ok. Alors, 1, 2, 3.
Le prince est là!
Tu fais quoi, Thomas, là? On commence. 1. Oh là. Tu fixes la caméra, Thomas. Fixe la caméra.
Tu souris jamais, toi.
Bon, et cette coiffure? Pourquoi? Pourquoi du comment? Parce que l'année dernière, t'as passé un mauvais cap avec. Moi j'aime, hein, tout le monde aime.
Voilà.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you also, Kate, who's translating for us. I have so many feelings and thoughts about this film. I want to take a moment to commend how spectacular I think it is that you made this film when you were 19. Yeah, I definitely was not nearly halfway towards being able to articulate for myself and in my own multiracial family, let alone publicly, the complexities of what was going on around race, racism, and denial at 19. And I just, I want to take a moment just to kind of honor, I think, the powerfulness and vulnerability and haunting that film is full of. Okay, so last but certainly not least, we have Emma Davey, a director who's coming to us from Argyll in Scotland. And Emma, I feel that your work really speaks for itself. It's the kind of work I don't want to talk about. I just want people to see it. So I'll hand you the floor, and then we'll come back and have a discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Emma. I hope you can hear me, and more to the point, I hope you can understand my Scottish accent. Okay, so just to say, I'm so honoured to be in such a panel with such incredible filmmakers and very humbled to share this space with you. I'm going to be talking a bit about 2 films that I've made, and yeah, I wrote something because I felt a bit nervous speaking on this webinar. So I thought, oh, I'm just going to back it all up, straps and whatever the expression is, and write something just in case. So yeah, I think I'll launch in, and hopefully I'll make a bit of sense. And then I thought of showing the trailer at the beginning, but maybe actually I'll show it at the end. I'm showing the trailer to a film that was made about a man who has motor neuron disease, and the film was called I Am Breathing. At the time, the illness wasn't really seen on screen very much. I mean, one of the reasons being that people who had the illness often died, sadly, very quickly after contracting it. So in a certain sense, that invisibility meant that there wasn't funding around the illness, and that also had so many ramifications in terms of research and in terms of finding a cure. So finding visibility for this was very important in that film, and that's the trailer I'm going to show at the end of this. So this is what I've written. You graciously want to give me the word, but now I'm hesitant with words. Maybe because they're so open to ambiguity, loaded with baggage, or maybe I just can't be in them. The desire not to explain anything or have to work out where we are at as women making films is so strong, despite the sense that we still need to. Can we just be? The way Patti Smith just is on the front of her album cover Easter, arms up, hairy armpit exposed. I want to exist between the screen and the audience in that liminal space of cinema where you and I don't exist as separate beings, but are drawn together, when we sort of co-create the moment of seeing, of feeling, of sensing, with all its nuances. Breaking down divisions between us and the notion of other is at the heart of what I want to do with documentary. Maybe our bodies provide a clue. They contain less ambiguity than words. We watch films with them. My stomach lurches, my hands grip the arm of the seat, my feet want to dance. It's a visceral embodied experience. How does my body as a filmmaker feel in response to what we see when I film? Can it help me imagine the inner life of another through a haptic experience? When I first went to film Neil, the main character in my film I Am Breathing, he was on a huge breathing machine which kept him alive. It was like he'd become half man, half machine, totally paralysed from the neck down. The gulf between his experience and mine felt impossible to cross, and I wondered what right I had to pick up a camera even to start to relate his experience. I never meant to make this film, but a pal of mine, a fiction filmmaker called Morag McKinnon, told me her friend had this awful paralysing illness and wanted to raise more awareness of it before he died. He did this through a blog. She thought, we should make a film. I'm always a reluctant filmmaker. I went to see him though and was so struck by his strength, his need to speak and to find words, and it was such a struggle with his breathing machine, but his need to try and articulate and find an expression for his experience was so strong that it felt that a film had to be made. In a way, he propelled it further. So Morag and I co-directed the film, and the whole process was fueled by the question, what right have we got to film someone in this state? And more importantly, this led to how can we give Neil agency in the film? How can we empower him so he's not just seen as a man defined by his illness? At this stage, I should say he was crippled from the neck down and could only keep alive through this breathing machine. The only thing that he could move with was his mouth and his eyes. And so my question was, how can we empower him so he is not just seen as a man defined by his illness and a failing body on screen? How to avoid making him a double victim, both to the illness and to a camera. We spoke often to him about how we should film, what should be in it, and tried to make the process as collaborative as possible. At his suggestion, the film started and ended with the breathing machine, which was his connection, his thin connection to life. So here's one of the many paradoxes of cinema. I use the camera to try to cross the gulf between us and imagine the unimaginable experience of being stuck in his body. I film his arm being picked up tenderly by a nurse, his straw being placed in and out of his mouth by his wife's hand, his wallpaper, the view from his window, the curtains opening, the curtains closing, his wallpaper again, his tactile everyday world, the sensory stuff of life of the shrunken world which had become his universe. But this other world, his inner world, needed a language too. And as he wrote his blog, it became clearer that this was a means of crossing that divide, as they accessed at least a sense of this. This was his connection with the world, these words. In fact, they kept his presence in the edit as an ongoing alive force, sort of collaborating with us long after he died. By the end of the filming, he became more and more on fire with what the camera could communicate. His most incredible collaboration came the day before he died. We weren't there filming, but he insisted his cousin film him reading out his last blog, which included his decision to go to the hospice and end his life. He could barely talk, but when the camera fell off the bed, he instructed her to pick it up and keep filming. Even at this stage of his life, Neil found an incredible power through the possibility of film and its impact to communicate after he died. In attempting to cross the divide between Neil and us, the impossibility of this is obviously clearer and clearer. His experience should remain the mystery, the elusive thing it ultimately is, not defined by film, but suggested somehow. The last film I made had a similar sense of trying to cross an impossible divide and give expression this time, maybe to something which is so ineffable that it was almost a romantic thing to try and articulate. Becoming Animal was made in collaboration with the writer David Abram and the filmmaker Peter Mettler. David's known for 2 books, Spell of the Sensuous and Becoming Animal, about our connection with what he calls the more than human world. The film tried to make a very different kind of nature documentary, trying to reimagine our connection with the natural world by interrogating our anthropocentric way of seeing. Both Peter and I felt that behind the crisis of the environmental mess we're in lies a crisis of perception. And by that, I mean a failure to see the living things in the world around us as having life. Not just plants and animals, but rocks, air. The film explored how differently the world looks if we grant other things around an agency, which, as David pointed out, was present for 95% of human existence when we saw through the eyes of animism. So maybe we were trying to make a new animistic film, but of course we didn't want to pretend with all our technology we weren't the medium through which this is being seen. We were, of course, the filming animal, and our camera is part of the interrelated world of beings which we both inhabit and witness. So from that perspective, it remains this inescapable paradox that we can't quite escape one of the very things which has created this disjunction with the natural world, which is, of course, the greatest tragedy the human race is facing. We wanted to use film as a means of reconnection with the sense of communicating in a world of ever-evolving reciprocity, where I see or feel a leaf and am also felt or seen by it. How we show this relationship in film was our challenge in becoming animal. Ultimately, the screen itself, of course, had a life, and the film too, an ever-changing organic being which has so much capacity in these strange times to offer a space for regathering, for reconnecting. Maybe I see film as a sort of medicine for addressing the power structures of seeing. How can what is silent or hard to hear have a voice and presence in film? What more of our own humanity comes alive when we see or hear it? Yeah, so I selected that we see a clip, the trailer for I Am Breathing, and honestly, I'm not sure if that was the right thing to do, because obviously it's made like a trailer, so please forgive me if it's a wee bit trailer-like, but here it is.
If you're approaching the end of your contract and would like to discuss your option, press 4.
They go through the whole automated bit, got to an operator. Hello, sir. I hear you're wanting to disconnect. Yes, that's right. Can I ask you why, sir? Because I'm dying. Right, sir. Would it make any difference if we just threw in 3 months extra free? At which point I shouted, if you could do that, sunshine, get a better bloke than all my doctors put together.
Where's Oscar? Hello. Oscar and Daddy?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Emma, for that. I'm just going to try and see if I can make us all bring us into the frame a bit more clearly. Let's see. There we go. Hi. So I'd like to start with, I think, a question for all of us, and maybe for the next 15 minutes, we can really just try to have a conversation together. I think it's really important to bring some of your works and as well as your beings, because of course these works are in many ways physical manifestations of parts of all of you and all of the people that have made you up, into conversation more collectively. And let's remain mindful of the transcription, which does not work if we speak over each other. So let's try and speak together, but not over each other, which is a good metaphor for how we, I think, need to move forward in the world. I want to begin with a question around care, because I think these works which are political, which are speaking back to particular histories, particular gazes and stereotypes and violences that are historical but are also contemporary, are also lived and alive, are living histories. And I'd like to ask a little about how you care for yourself in the filmmaking process and the post filmmaking process. So this terrifying moment in which the film goes out into this world, which then puts it in lots of different boxes and says, oh, it's a film about this, or it's a film that's doing this, or this series is fulfilling this, diversity agenda, right? So how you care for yourself in that moment, and then also how you care for your participants who are have a different relationship to the film and the camera and the audience, even in the making, as well as when it is out in the world being seen. So a question around care for yourself. I suppose care for the film is also in there, and care for the participants. And whoever would like to come in first is welcome.
I can come in. So in terms of care, I think for me, what has been really important is the interview process that and the relationship that I'm building with the people that I'm interviewing. And because I work by myself, I found early on it was really important for that to really be a conversation. So it's off camera, it's with my voice recorder. We can hold eye contact and we can just have this conversation. A lot of the time it's been very important for people to just talk. So often I will end up, because I like to create a lot of space in those moments, so I'll end up just turning the voice recorder off when I know that this might not be appropriate, and it might not, and I know that it's definitely not going to be in the story or something that someone might actually want out in the world. So in terms of care, in thinking about that, the responsibility you have as a filmmaker with the stories that you're carrying and the voices that you're representing. And also building that relationship, coming back and forth and allowing time and space for that relationship to build has been really important to my process. It's been important to my self-care in terms of not having that pressure of I need to get this and I need to rush myself and rush the person who I'm interviewing to feel like, we're getting a particular story at a particular time. So allowing a lot of space, and I could only do that by just turning this into a kind of life project of just, if it works today, if I need to come back another time and we need to, do that in a year's time, there's no time frame. And that's what I love about just creating in the space that I'm creating. And I know that's actually very different probably for a lot of you guys also, because maybe you're, creating for, you have schedules and you have timeframes and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's kind of the only way that I can work. And that's what care looks like for me.
I think it's a great question, Amma, and one which I think is coming up increasingly in the documentary world anyway, how people around the world who are making films, often in very difficult circumstances, look after themselves in the process. And personally, I don't think I've been very good at looking after myself when I'm making films because it takes over your whole life. But in terms of looking after participants, certainly in this film that I just showed the trailer of, we were very concerned about the family's ongoing relationship with the film, because of course the life of it afterwards is so unpredictable when they say yes to the filming process. But so in a way, the beginning of looking after them after the process in a way began right at the beginning, when we talked about what we were actually doing and made it kind of sure that it was their work somehow as well as ours. And I think that's what allowed what happened afterwards with that film anyway, which is that it travelled a lot. That's what allowed certainly Louise, Niels's widow, to feel that she was on that journey with it, which she was. And how she looked after herself, how we looked after her, I think was very much connected with just keeping communicating as much as possible about what was going on and checking in with her and checking it was okay. I was actually very worried about what it would be like for her seeing the film with an audience, doing Q&As. Actually, she discovered a power in it. And I think maybe that was just one thing I just wanted to say, is don't underestimate your participants. I mean, she actually in the end ended up doing interviews in breakfast television, traveling to New York and doing Q&As and chats and things, and was totally in her element, and in a funny way felt like it made sense of, I mean, she used that process to make sense of what she'd been through. So it became a different process in the film.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in, because I really agree with the idea of having maybe the process of developing or making a work, see it more as a collaboration between the different people who are part of it on either side of the camera. And for us, it's also quite important to collaborate with the actors and actresses we work with. May they be professionally trained actors or people who are there just for maybe smaller scenes, and rather view them as collaborators, or even like co-authors, co-creators, because we've learned that there's so much to gain from collectively creating characters and stories, and to draw from the experiences and that richness of experience that people bring. Although of course that's also a difficult thing again, because if you want to be careful with both protecting privacy and personal experiences, but also kind of building that intimate space where you can have shared experiences and then build a story from that. And about the aspect of caring for oneself, maybe I can speak a bit about the reception of Foto 3 and also a youth series that I was a part of writing, that revolves around a young girl who has trouble in school and falls in love. And she also happens to be a young Black lesbian falling in love with a German Vietnamese bisexual young girl. And so there's, a lot of things where a lot of people talked about how it's maybe a new kind of representation that we don't see so much if those kind of identity points aren't the conflict of the story. But then if you do make these kind of works, there's also that kind of like burden of representation where people might start to have to criticize a lot more things than they would maybe if productions or filmmakers obviously don't care about these kind of questions. And we've had to, well, we didn't have to learn, we're still learning very much how to deal with that kind of critical feedback, and how to listen and learn from it, and maybe also how to be okay with this moment of insecurity and uncomfortableness, because like you said also just now, Emma, like how do you bridge experiences that are different? How do you speak in proximity to people, but not from the same experience? And I think it's this like insecurity and uncomfortableness is never going to go away, and that's probably a good thing. Yeah, but it's difficult to also to take care of oneself in the face of maybe critical feedback.
Du coup, je vais répondre à la question. You want me to answer that now? When I made my film, my first film about my family, this whole question of taking care of the protagonists and other people when you make a committed film was very complicated. The people around me who were advising me advised me to draw out everything I could at any cost and to say all I wanted to say. So it's quite complicated. You need to make the most of the feelings. Either you show nothing or you show it all. In my photo albums, we had blackface. I decided not to show that in my family film. But sometimes I ask myself that question again. I think, shouldn't I have shown that? And in the film On ne peut plus rien dire, I decided to care for my family, even for my mother, who didn't really want to accept that I was experiencing racism. I decided to take care of my brothers and so forth and to show them in that way. And I think that was the best key, because there's cinema, and cinema is important, but when you do films, you do have to protect the people who are in front of the camera. After that, I made my second film about mourning, and some of my best friends who went through a very hard time when they lost their mother due to suicide. And their father is a big drug baron. So when I was doing the research for that film, they placed their trust in me because they'd seen my first film and they said, okay, given that you didn't crush your family, we'll trust you completely. And they gave me everything, the whole family archives, loads of letters, 500 letters, home videos, etc., even stuff they hadn't read themselves. So I got to this second film, and I went even further than in the first. There was such a fusion there between myself and the protagonists in front of the camera that I wasn't trying to draw a boundary. I wasn't really worried about the repercussions because it was the choice the protagonists had made in front of the camera. It was the choice we all made to show everything, to be completely autobiographical, to go to the bitter end. Because the two of us, me and my mum, that's not an environment which really encourages people to articulate their views. They knew it was complicated to do that. But there, I went the whole way. I think there are two schools of thought. If the protagonists are in agreement, agree to show everything, to take risks and accept the consequences, then you can't say that either one or the other is bad. I think in the second documentary that I made, there's one scene that I'm quite satisfied with, where the sisters forget the camera is there and all of a sudden you have a real family moment and you use the camera to the extreme, like a confessional without a filter or anything. And in this scene, which is an argument between sisters, I could have said, okay, no, we'll cut that out and you'll notice in the film. But I decided not to edit it out. It was tricky for me. I had to question myself and the boundaries of cinema and so forth. But in the end, what came out of it was that everyone was satisfied. We all learned out of that scene and it bumped us out of our comfort zone and enabled us to move the documentary story on. I think that's the way. What I learned from that documentary is that it's conflicts that drive stories forward. You need to go as far as you can, keep searching, and if you learn something from it, from that scene, and if something positive comes out of it, even if it hurts, then go for it. It's a bit radical. But I think that you could soften it, of course, but I think it's important. If you don't often get the floor, you need to make an impact when you do. You have to be a bit more extreme and radical. I don't know if I gave you a good answer.
That was a brilliant answer, Nimi. Thank you so much for that generosity. I feel the fact that you're all being very generous, and I'm going to take a moment to break the fourth wall and speak to the audience, just to say directly that I think this level of generosity is not always the norm, and it's something that I'm trying to build in my teaching. Is how do we how do my students, how do I as a teacher, as a writer, as a holder, how do I care for the texts and the films that we're studying and talking about, that these are not abstract artworks, that these are the fruits of people's lives, sometimes lives that were never meant to exist, let alone be captured on film or hold cameras or hold pens. And I really am grateful for the generosity that you are all showing us in this moment. I think there's really something here in the power of witnessing and facilitating that witnessing. And I really am grateful for this insistence on trusting participants / collaborators and trusting their ability to know what is too much, what is okay, what is what consent means in that moment. So I really appreciate that. And I think I just want to ask one more question before we move to the audience, because there's something really interesting that's happening in these films, but I think also across this moment of documentary filmmaking or visual activism or the various kind of terms that are arising, which is this return to the personal as political, which is also interesting as we are coming back to this idea of the gaze, right? And I think it's partly to do with this popcorn activism that Paulina is talking about. It's partly to do with this moment of Instagram, where showcasing or displaying one's intimate life as proof that we are here, proof that we're living differently, to proof that, you know, we are not, proof that not all Black people are straight, proof that not all Black people are homophobic, proof that not all Black people are Christians, proof that not all Black people are drug addicts, etc., and impoverished, right? Proof that these stereotypes that we live with in different ways are such a tiny part of what exists. And I see this personal as political really coming out in this return to the home movie, which is present in all of your works in different ways. And here I really see these also as a way of making home movies, these kinds of, these portraits. And then the incorporation of actual home movies and home movie footage. And then the kind of creation, Paulina, I think also of like speculative home movies, like the home movie that would have been if that camera had been there, or if we hadn't had to move suddenly and lost those VHSs, right? Or if the house didn't flood and the tape was warped. So I just want to ask a little bit, and maybe we can do kind of short answers about this return to the personal as political in terms of cinematic choices around these home movie inclusions, curations, creations that I think comes up in all of your work. I can also direct the question. Maybe we can start, Paulina, with you, if that's okay, because you were nodding very enthusiastically as I was asking the question.
Yes. Yeah, it's a big and really good question. And when I was watching everyone's little videos, I also noticed that this home video, but also in general, this, yeah, what you call return to the personal, maybe also the quiet, the everyday, the biographical is something that runs through these projects. And I think for us, it's very specifically rooted in a like historical and also material context of VHS in the 90s in Germany being the thing, but also being a thing for immigrant families in particular, and kind of there's been literature written about immigrants as like transnational pioneers, as pioneers of new media. So kind of this looking at media usage as something that's a skill. And I think that's something that's shown in those images. And then also a lot of people we spoke with, a lot of people in my proximity were saying like, yeah, we all have these videos and they're so important because maybe our experiences are not represented in history books or in museums or in films, but actually our parents formatted these histories in their own living rooms. So I think there's a big power in that, and also in like the active curation of using these videos, especially in our case, like a second generation curation of these videos, which kind of goes along with this post-migrant project as a project of retelling history and re-narrating. Yeah, so I think that's maybe kind of the specific context in Germany. And for us also, maybe one last point, like at the very end of the home video sequence, the little boy, who's actually Faraz, the director, is standing in front of a TV, singing into a microphone, and he's wearing a Sailor Moon costume. Pop culture again, like, and the Sailor Moon costume comes up again later in the film. And it was also kind of important to us when we speak about this connection and this entanglement of queerness and migration and post-migration, to kind of show that there's not like an immigrant past in these home videos that's straight and normative or whatever. And then we break out of these home videos and we come into the diasporic Germany, where now everyone is queer and liberated, but it's like the queerness is right there in the home videos. And it's just hanging out. Yeah, sorry, that wasn't so short.
Yeah, no, I was thinking in that section of the clip about the opening sequence to the Amazon Prime series Transparent, which is a very complex and problematic series in many ways, but the opening sequence I think is really important because I believe they did an open call for people's home videos, queer people's home videos, and so I think that collaging is important. Anya, I wonder if we can come to you on this kind of do you see these portraits in some ways as creating home videos?
Home video is in the sense of a very intimate, very, very intimate space. You know, so, you know, that space that you may only have with, you know, a sibling or a parent, someone very close to you. So like Auntie Dawn, for example, kind of adopted me as a niece and kind of became like this sort of mother figure. And, you know, it was like quite a long time before we did this interview But it's, I mean, for me, creating portraits which recreate the experiences that I've been having in that connection, you know, so, you know, it took a while to have this connection with Auntie Dawn, but then I'm sharing it to everyone in a very, which is kind of, I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking as well, like that's also an interesting thing. But, you know, of course, it's always very important to me that the stories and that intimacy is completely transparent and that people are completely okay with that. And I remember showing the film to Auntie Dawn and her really enjoying it and being really happy that I omitted whole sections of things that we talked about. But yeah, I suppose I really concentrate on the intimate personal space of home, opposed to sort of any kind of physical space as well. So everything is very, very internal. And even, yeah. That's
okay, beautiful, thank you. I think the fact that also that Auntie Dawn's clip is about her home.
Yeah.
I think also the real breaking down of a literal home video and what is classed as a home in that way, I think is also strong.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that, I mean, that was a space that I needed somewhere to live, and Auntie Dawn gave me that space, and that was her original home in her family yard. And you know, it hadn't been lived in for a long time, and so we needed to attach a door, we needed to clean it up, we needed to chop down an ackee tree which was sort of overhanging, and all of this was a process of learning about safety also for me, you know, like the way that you attach the door, it needs to open outwards instead of inwards, because she's telling me, you know, if someone tries to kick in the door, it has to have that extra reinforcement. I didn't want to take down the ackee tree, but she's like, you know, people need to be able to see the house, it can't be concealed. And then she looked at me at one point and was just like, well, you know, you're a big woman, so you're fine, you'll be fine here. And it was just so interesting, because it's like, that was the first time that I'd really been, you know, seen as like, you know, you're this big, strong woman, you can look after yourself. But I was totally taken into this different space of home and what home means, and, you know, the things that you need to think through in terms of safety and network. And, you know, I like the idea that the tree is sort of giving me privacy, but the importance that other people can see into that space. So yeah, that was also kind of all of these relationships and sort of sentiments and experiences really feed into that work and creating those feelings of home for me. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in some questions from the audience and feed them in here, because I think that there's some really highly relevant ones. I'd like to start with this question from Cornelia. Let me begin with, and Cornelia asks, would it be helpful to learn about dealing with protagonists at film school? Which I think is interesting, because I kind of want to ask you this question about, like, can you learn how to work with protagonists kind of in an educational, like, institutional setting, or really is it something that you have to learn on the go? I mean, you've, you know, talked about how much the first film influenced the way you wanted to work in the second film, the way you wanted to work with the protagonists, with the participants, the collaborators, and so I'd kind of love for you to speak a little bit about that mode of learning, how you want to work with people, and I suppose also how you want to work more generally or broadly.
Sorry, Emma, who did you direct the question to? Or was Nimi?
Sorry,
non, désolé.
Sorry.
Oui,
Yes, so at film school, yes, I learned to work with characters, and that's where I noticed how important it was what color the skin is. For example, what we learned at film school was that you had to start with the scenario if you were writing for a black character. You couldn't say it's a girl. You had to say it's a black girl. Yeah. I mean, the price tag of a film will depend on whether the character is black or white. So at film school, we learned a lot of things about how to tell stories, how to reiterate an idea in lots of different ways. And that certainly taught us. I learned a great deal. I'm basically a camera operator. I learned how to light skins, unfortunately not French skins. But these days, now that I've left film school, I'm really trying to put all that behind me and to develop a freedom around my characters, because sometimes I get the impression that when I'm writing for fictional characters, if they're black, that I'm trapped in trauma, that you're obliged, sorry about that, I'm obliged to write a trauma for a black character, a racist trauma, because the people around me influence me in that direction. They encourage me to do that. Whereas what I really want to see is films with normal stories where a black character isn't just going to be trapped into a racist trauma. We have the right not to be trapped in that. I want to see black characters, for example, a shy black woman, and not the angry black woman you see everywhere. So everything I learned at film school, I'm now trying to deconstruct. I'm really engaged in this deconstruction because I get the feeling that at the film school where I was at, everything was done for white people. And, for example, when I asked important DOPs how to light a black skin, how to film a black skin, they didn't know the answer, most of them. I have a friend, Diarra Souran, who's written a thesis about that, about lighting French skin. She's done her own research. You have more of this kind of research in the United States, but there's not much done in France. So I'm having to go about this deconstruction rather on my own and learn these things anew, because I don't want to be trapped in certain stories. I don't know if that's enough of an answer, but this question of working with characters is very important, and in France, it's pretty new in France that we're seeing black characters like Arsène Lupin, a detective, or 17th century characters. Even today, there are black actors who never get to see themselves in a historical role in the French past. Although the black diaspora has been in France for such a long time. Louis XIV had a black daughter, but all this information, we don't have access to it. And of course it influences how you write a character. I want to see myself as a black woman. What do I have a right to say? We're always being put in our place and saying, no, you don't have a right to say that. It's very insidious, like I was saying in my introduction. In France, we have this denial of racism. We're all universalists here. So that means that you blank yourself out. And when I realized that, coming from a multicultural family, I grew up with my mother saying, we don't see color, except that we do see color. The only person in the family who hadn't experienced racism was my mother and my father. My brother got hassled by police because they thought he was an Arab and so forth. But it's completely new in this environment, in this universalist setting, which is a bit... It's a form of oppression, but it's a bit of an insidious form. There's an interesting book that I'm working on at the moment called Eureka, which talks exactly about that, and it does it very well. I can only recommend it.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for that detailed reply. I really hear you, and I think it was making me think about Eugene Ashe's Sylvie's Love, which is a film that came out at the end of last year, which is one of the first films that I've seen that I felt really like effectively told a Black love story that was real, as in it happened in the world in 50s to I think the late 60s/early 70s America. So it doesn't ignore the civil rights movement or what's happening or racism, but it's not centered around Black trauma. And the conflict is not about it's not about just about race. It doesn't center whiteness. And I think the fact that this is really feels new to have this kind of film coming out in 2020 in the United States, which, as you say, really is in many ways the heart of a plethora of Black discourse in terms of the sheer amount of works that are coming out of a single country. I think we have a long way to go in Europe and a lot of work to do. So let's have one question also for Emma. I'm taking this question from one of Max's, and Max, sorry, I hope you don't mind, I'm slightly morphing it a little bit, around this idea of kind of the interior versus the exterior. And I really love the way that you articulated this leap needing to happen between Neil's interior world and exterior world, but I think it was also present in your interior and exterior world as a filmmaker, in this idea of being a reluctant filmmaker or not intending to or wanting to make this project, but it came through this personal connection of a friend. And this linking of what is going on inside versus what's going on outside, because in many ways this becomes an activist film, right? It goes on to take this role that is about representation, that is about calling attention to, that is about taking note of this erasure of this particular degenerative illness, which has catastrophic results, that it is continuously erased and not called attention to, and yet is so much a film about interiority, and your interiority, Neil's interiority, Louise's interiority, all becomes bound up in this storytelling. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about this. I think you said this crossing the divide between the interior and the exterior. You're muted.
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question, Emma. I think the question of when you're allowed to cross the divide and when you're not still confuses me. And I think it's something Paulina mentioned too, this discomfort that maybe is actually a gift to us as filmmakers, I begin to think. So I was always ethically confused about making this film. That confusion never went away. And, this sense of staying with it, holding it, getting to know it, making that confusion, that complexity around this sense of how much is film allowed to imagine anybody else's experience. How much, because even using his whole movie is still imagining and creating a fiction out of it, out of his experience, and so still contains a bit of discomfort for me. And I would have happily made a film of just looking at his body the way that it was, and actually, but it was kind of unbearable to see, to be honest. And his existence wasn't contained in that, as I said earlier, and it would have been doing a disservice to him to have just contained it in that. In a way, it would have been giving a hierarchy to the visual. And maybe this is the interesting thing, is what how can film not just have the visual as a hierarchy of how you interpret experience? And I think it's interesting actually I think about some young Indian filmmakers whose work I love, like some young women like Payal Kapadia, many interesting filmmakers in different countries who are dealing with this very personal work are going from sound as a basis, interestingly enough. So maybe the question of interiority is something that actually creates this sort of filmic question, and that filmic question is what we need to keep going, and that filmic sense of actually not knowing whether it's okay to imagine, for example, at the beginning of that trailer, you see what looks like Neil's feet running along a beach, which weren't his feet, they were mine. Is that okay? Is that ethically okay? I mean, we tell lies to tell the truth in documentary, it seems like to me. But I think those questions are ones which interest me, and which actually, interestingly, when the film came out, people didn't really talk a lot about the ethics of it, which really I found strange that wasn't something that was mentioned. And I think maybe because of his presence being so strong, and because of actually allowing the words. And I think it was only when we actually discovered that the blog could allow us into his power, because actually as soon as he had a word, he had a power. When he had a word that was really defining his experience, he had a power. And that's when I felt comfortable making the film. Before then, I didn't feel comfortable making it. But then I felt I can make it. And I think it wasn't just the word and the blog, it was the fact that we showed his process of trying to write. So actually there was something almost heroic in the act of creating those words. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if I've entirely answered your question, but I think it's just to say that I think this discomfort actually is fantastic fuel for understanding what you're doing in a way that I hadn't really understood before. So I was really pleased to hear to hear Polina talk about that, because it's a word that I like. And it's a word that actually feels right, because it almost feels physically uncomfortable, and I think that is appropriate. I feel just one thing I just want to add is, I mean, it's only right that we feel vulnerable. We're putting other people's lives in such a space of vulnerability. So I feel like I want to share that. I want to participate in their vulnerability.
Thank you for that, Emma. I was thinking as you were speaking about some anti-racist training that like many artists of color get pulled into doing, despite not being our job, in which I was trying to explain this notion of discomfort, and that it's supposed to be uncomfortable. And I think, coming back to this notion of best practice, a lot of it is really, I think, betting, not shying away or turning away from how broken this system is and has left so many of us. And that best practice is maybe a practice in resilience, a practice in care, and most certainly a practice of discomfort, learning to sit with it, learning to show it, learning to tell its stories, the stories of the fragments, and the splinters and those that are discarded, which really vastly outnumber the idea of something that maybe is whole. So on that note, I'm going to bring our discussion, although I really feel we could have continued for a long time, but we're over time, and I want to care for everybody's time, and also leave time for us to potentially join this this virtual bar, non-alcoholic bar, in the other room. And I just want to truly, well, actually, first of all, apologize if we didn't get to your question and it came through. I think sometimes also just having the questions present is an important contribution to the discussion. So thank you for every comment and question in the chat. But really deeply and sincerely, thank you to our spectacular panelists for sharing your work with us, your words, your histories, your practices. And please do go and check out all of their work. And there's some wonderful references and colleagues and collectives and literature that's been placed in the chat as well. So please do take note. I think the point of practice is that it's ongoing and continuous. So let this be not an end, but a moment of rest or a moment of pause as we continue on toward freeing the gaze. Thank you all so much. I'm so grateful, and I pass us back over to Maxa.
Thank you so much, Ama, and the panelists. You're right, Ama. I think we could continue for another hour or so. We'll do so in the bar, but I've definitely also already taken a lot from this discussion. I think especially the holistic approach to filmmaking, not specializing it or putting it into medium-specific boxes, but thinking about issues beyond the filming process, which you, Ama, opened up so brilliantly by immediately going into the question of care. So thank you very much for this.